Hello, everyone. It's that time of the month again, and I'm going to be looking at the latest stats on the Toronto area's housing market. What do they show for the month of June? We're going to be looking at the low-rise market, the market for condominiums. I'm going to unpack for condos the types of units or the biggest growth in the number of new listings based on condo size, and what sales look like year over year based on the size of condominium units. We've been hearing a lot of news about this growth is in micro condos, and we'll look at that a little bit more detail. And I'll look at the latest rental data. As you can see behind me, I'm recording from Athens this month. I'm out of the country, but still wanted to give a quick update, obviously, on all the latest trends. As always, if you have any questions of your own, you can click the link below to set up a meeting with me one-on-one. Otherwise, you can send me an email at askjohn@movesmartly.com. Now, before we kick into the latest trends, I thought I'd unpack what I think are a couple of confusing headlines. So if we pull up this headline from the Globe and Mail, highlighting the latest statistics, you'll see that their headline says Toronto home sales rise, but emboldened buyers take their time. Now, of course, this is obviously a report talking about sort of an increase in sales. If we look at this article from the Toronto Star, it talks about sales plummeting 28%. As sales crash across all property types. So two very different narratives. And the question, of course, is, well, what the heck is going on? How can one paper be talking about sales increasing, another one talk about sales declining? And again, I think this really has to do with the type of data they're using. So I thought I'd kind of just unpack this briefly for people reading articles to make sense of what's going on. So the Toronto Star is looking at changes in sales year over year. That's typically what we do because there's a seasonality to housing. We can't compare, sales volumes between, April and May and August or December because there are seasonal factors that impact the volume of transactions in any given month. So that's what the Toronto Star is looking at. Now, the Globe and Mail is looking at the month over month change in sales using what's called a seasonally adjusted metric. So the Toronto Real Estate Board adjusts sales volumes to take into account seasonal differences. And this is why they said sales are up slightly. So adjusting for the seasonality, they're saying sales are actually improving a little bit in June compared to May. So that's a little bit on some of these differences. I tend to look at year over year, but obviously, sometimes it's helpful to look at what's going on month over month on a seasonally adjusted basis as well to get a better sense of what's going on in the market. So with that said, I'm going to jump into the latest trends for the low-rise market. And when we look at the number of sales were down year over year, 13%, just over 4,000 sales. And this is for low-rise houses in the Greater Toronto area. New listings were up 8%, so just over 10,000 new listings for houses. And when we look at active listings, that's up 45%, 12,554. This volume looks quite high. It's not unbelievably high if we compare it to historical trends. I mean, it's higher than more recent trends. In part because we had a record low volume of listings last year, and in the previous years, we had these really aggressive kind of bull markets where demand significantly outpaced new listings, so we had a relatively low volume of active listings. But when we look at condos, the number of active listings is not off the charts. The number of sales is quite low. I didn't touch on that. It's probably very close to a 20-year low. Maybe 2 years ago it was a little bit lower, but very, very soft sales volumes if we compare that to historical levels. And when we look at the months of inventory, that has been climbing. The month of inventory is basically looking at the total number of active listings, dividing that by the number of sales in the month. And that basically gives us an indication of how long it would take the current inventory to sell if nothing else came in the market and sales volumes retained at that level. So the higher the months of inventory, the slower the market is. The lower the months of inventory, the more competitive the market is. So we're seeing that the market is rebounding. Inventory levels are accelerating. They're still below where we were in the second half of last year when we had 4 months of inventory, but things are slowing down at just over 3 months of inventory. The percentage of properties selling for over asking is declining, which is expected, about 42%. And average sale prices are down 5% year over year. If we look back, this is really driven by the little rally that we had in sort of the first half of last year, and then prices dipped in the second half. So prices are down a little bit month over month, but down 5% from last year. Average price for low-rise home 1.382. Now, if we look at the condo data, we do see some slightly different trends. I mean, condo sales are also down. I mean, down 27%, just under 2,000 transactions. This also is very close to a 20-year low, so very soft volumes. A lot of this driven, of course, by high interest rates and a lack of affordability. Now, when we look at the number of sales, I wanted to look at both sales and listings. What is the change in the number of transactions between the second quarter of this year, so it's April, May, June, and the second quarter of last year? How have sales volumes and transactions differed? So when we look at that, we basically see that, and I broke it down by unit size, I should say. So it's the smallest units, 0 to 499 square feet, that have seen the biggest decline, just under 35% drop. The average is close to 19% decline. And again, like we're seeing basically the units in the sort of 6 to 7, 7 to 8, 8 to 9 are slightly above average. And for some reason, 500 to 599 square units are slightly below average. Units in the 900s are below average. But we do see that the biggest decline is really in these small units. And I think this is largely, of course, driven by the fact that those tend to be purchased by investors, and there's a lot less investor demand in the market right now. Now, when we look at new listings, they're up 16%, 6,700-ish new listings for condominiums. Now, if I do a similar exercise and look at the change year over year between the second quarter of this year and the second quarter of last year in new listings, we do see an interesting trend. Now, interestingly enough, the units 0 to 499 square feet are below the average in terms of the growth in new listings. I think part of that is because many of these are more recent listings, more recent buildings that were probably opted to be rented. There's far less existing stock of small units that were built 3, 4, 5 years ago for us to sort of look at some of these trends. So many of these are more recent. That being said, once we go to 500 and 599 square units, sort of also a very common investor size, we see a 50% increase in new listings. And from there, generally, as units get larger, the change in the number of new listings is lower. So we're seeing far fewer owners of, say, 1,200 square foot plus units, lister units for sale this year compared to last year, whereas the smaller units are seeing far more growth in new listings. So that's a little bit about some of the dynamics based on condo unit size. Now, if we look at active listings, 10,688 condominiums and condo townhouses available for sale. That's up 70% and a record high. We surpassed last month's record high. And I should add, a record for any month in any given year. This is not just a record for the month of June. This is for any month in history. And when we look at the months of inventory, that is also climbing pretty rapidly. We have 4 months of inventory last month, 5.4 this month. So things are accelerating pretty quickly. Things are cooling down pretty rapidly for the condo market. We're still seeing some units sell for over asking. Again, some of these unique, probably nice layouts, very special units. But again, it's only 24%, and that's trending down as well. Average prices are also down slightly, 3%. Average price $753. The interesting thing is, even with all this inventory, prices have been pretty sticky so far. We're not seeing too much downward pressure. Again, this decline is for year over year. If we look at sort of the more recent trends, prices have been pretty stable. And I think what happens over the next 3, 4, 5 months is ultimately going to drive what happens with condo prices. So if inventory continues to build, we might see some downward pressure in the fall market. You know, if we see a decline in inventory or buyers re-enter the market in September, you know, we could see some stability in prices. So tough to predict, but obviously we'll be keeping an eye on those trends. Now, if we look at the months of inventory on a weekly basis, so we can kind of see months of inventory has been kind of trending pretty rapidly high for condominiums. We appear to see that for houses, there's some stability, there's some plateauing. Again, there's only a couple of weeks worth of data, but we'll keep an eye on that. I forgot to mention that the condominiums for downtown Toronto has seen the highest increase in months of inventory, just under 6 months, about 5.9 months. Again, City of Toronto has the highest number of units, and has seen the highest number of units actually listed for sale and highest months of inventory. So slightly more sluggish in the Toronto housing market. That's City of Toronto, not the suburbs. Now, quick look at the rental data. Number of leases up 15% year over year. Just over 6,000 units were leased, a pretty decent volume. Number of listings up, rental listings up 34%, about 8,000 or so condominiums listed for lease in sort of June of last year, or sort of June of last month. And then when we look at the number of active listings, this is where it's interesting. Again, up 105%, 7,500 active rentals on the market now. So, you know, the rental market is sluggish, but obviously places are moving. You know, we have just over 1 month of inventory, which is not out of the ordinary for the condominium market. Interestingly enough, condominium rents are down 3% year over year, but they have been trending up the past 2-3 months. So again, I think this is this a trend that's going to continue? Again, this is the busiest time of year. So I don't know if I want to call this a trend. We'll see where things go in August and September. But this time of year, May, June, you know, if we think about the school season, many people looking for apartments for their kids, condominiums as they start school. So, you know, we tend to see the biggest pickup around this time of year. So we'll see if this trend continues or if we see some stability in rents as we move into the fall market. As always, if you have any of your questions of your own, please post them in the comments below, or you can shoot me an email at askjohn@movesmartly.com.